You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
A few weeks back, I moderated, you may recall, a panel on big tech censorship. And one of the big stories we talked about in that panel was during the presidential election last year, the New York Post and its story, which under any normal circumstances in a normal world, in a normal universe, would have been the bombshell story of the election about Hunter Biden and his laptop, but instead became suppressed, became subject not just to the cancellation and censorship of the New York Post by Twitter, but anyone who wanted to share the New York Post story on Twitter, on Facebook. And the reason I bring all that up is because this is a story, despite the significance of it, that most people have not heard because of all of the forces working against it. Well, two fantastic filmmakers are telling the story in a film they've announced called My Son Hunter. Phelim McAleer and McElhinney join me now. Good to talk to you both. Thanks for coming on, and congrats on launching this.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
It's an important story, yeah.
So we are a few months now past the election. A lot of the people that did pay attention to it were people in our orbit because they were looking for it. A lot of the people in the mainstream society were not hearing about this. Are you worried that you're going to have those same forces against you trying to tell this story?
Well, yeah, that's why we're making a movie, actually, rather than doing a documentary or a news story, is because movies have much more penetration. People will not necessarily seek out a documentary, but they may come across a movie, and we're going to put this online. We're going to give it away, and it's going to be entertaining. It's going to be fun. It's going to be accessible, but it's going to tell the truth that Hollywood and big tech and big media and don't want you to hear.
So, what is My Son Hunter about?
Well, it's a lot about the Biden family and the Biden's family corruption, family with a big F and a small f. But it's also, it's very much like your introduction alluded to. It's very much about media and about media bias and big tech censorship. That's equally as important a story here as the story of the Bidens. And the story of the Bidens is extraordinary. And it's amazing when you just think of the details of it. Here's a guy, Hunter Biden, who has a drug problem. I mean, that's not particularly unusual. There's a lot of people have that. We're from Ireland. We exported alcoholism around the world. So here's a guy with a drink. He's got an alcohol problem. He has to go to rehab. He has all these things that happen to him. He gets a stripper pregnant, and then says he isn't the father of the child. All this kind of stuff. And here's when you add all that about that he went to the Navy, that he was there for one day, got a special dispensation because he was older, and the first day he turns up, he tests positive for cocaine and gets thrown out. But put alongside that the fact that this guy is the guy that an energy company in the Ukraine, after doing a worldwide executive search, say, that's the guy. That's the guy we need to have sitting on our board. And your listeners, the people who watch your show are smart and they have common sense. This is not the guy you want on your board. Let's not, obviously the alcohol or his drug addiction thing, I'm very sorry and all that. That's not, this guy is on their board for one reason and one reason only. There is one reason and one reason only that guy is getting $3 million from the mayor of Moscow's wife. There is one reason and one reason only why that guy is getting an $85,000 diamond ring given to him by a random Chinese, businessman. There's one reason only that he's getting $100,000, him and members of his family, to do a shopping spree from Chinese business people. And there's one reason only, and that's the reason that we're going to expose, because the big guy that's referred to in these emails that came up in that very laptop that you talk about, the big guy is Joe Biden.
I want to read how you've described this film, Anne. You said it's Austin Powers meets King Lear with a dash of House of Cards. So you've got all the bases covered.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, it is. It's a family story as well as and it's got all these exotic locations. It's got the Ukraine, it's got China, it's got Monte Carlo,
Delaware.
And then at the end, when we spoke to a famous director in Hollywood, we won't say who it was, a famous writer as well, and he said, ultimately, Hunter Biden hates his father. That must be the reason he left the laptop behind. There's tension there. He was never the favorite son. Beau was the favorite son. So there's that tension. Then you got House of Cards. Really, Joe Biden had a son who was an addict. And how did he treat him? He made him his bag man. You know, there's something deeply, deeply sinister about this family. And it's brilliant, brilliant movie material. It's dark, it's funny, it's exotic.
Let me give you a funny.
There's plenty of beautiful women.
Let me give you a fun, and there's lots of beautiful women in it. Let me give you a funny. I mean, again, your audience are smart.
This is the Austin Powers side of the formula.
Yes.
If you're digging out the funny.
So here's a guy who has this, drug problem. He goes to a rehab. He's walking in the door of the rehab, and he meets a woman called Bicycles. Her name is Bicycles. She's homeless, and she always has a bicycle, and so her name is Bicycles. And this guy, the guy that the Ukrainian energy company chose above everyone else to be on their board, decides to go and live with her, to go and live with Bicycles, instead of going to rehab. So you can see where Burisma, you can understand why they wanted this guy on the board of their energy company.
An international executive search turned that up.
This guy that got rejected after one day at the Navy. So
anyone who's ever lost their job or had trouble getting one is going to be just infuriated by all of this, especially in the last year with the pandemic. Let me ask you, Phelim, because you've done some tremendous work before that I've talked about on the show, from the Gosnell movie to FBI Lovebirds and Ferguson, and a recurring theme in those is that you take a lot of the dialogue from court transcripts, from verbatim things that have happened. Do you have that going into this? I mean, how do you get the factual basis, or how much of it do you get from which you can build the fictionalized or at least dramatized account?
Well, Hunter Biden gave a confessional interview to the New Yorker in 2019. Now, it was clever because he gave it, and the interview was buried, and no one ever followed up on it. And all of these facts that we're telling you about now came from Hunter Biden's mouth. Then you've got the emails that he has never denied, and that no one involved in the emails has ever denied, and several people involved in the emails have confirmed. So, we're not going into conspiracy theories. We're going into confirmed details. And boy, I'll tell you, you don't need to go into conspiracy theories. There's a lot of questions to be answered. There's a lot of fun to be had, and there's a lot of information to bring to people. And
there's a serious point as well, which is this point that, when all of this was available, as Phelim says, all this information was available, freely available, it's all out there, just to be found. And intrepid reporters are supposed to be intrepid. They're supposed to care about this kind of thing, particularly in the run-up to a presidential election. And they chose not to report on this. And that's going to be a very, very important component of this movie, is exposing and showing the media for exactly what they did with the New York Post, who were intrepid, who did have this story and tried to get it out to the public and were suppressed by big tech. But also, shame on the New York Times, CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, all of these places that did not tell this story at all.
Yeah, and you raised something very important there. And I know that, a lot of my audience, of course, is Canadian, and some people may wonder why this is relevant. But I think there's a national and an international aspect to this, because the media problems exist all over the place. And one thing that I find particularly insidious about all of this is that, if Baron Trump were to walk down the street within 3 months of the time some Russian diplomat had walked down the street, it would have been on the front page of the New York Times. Yes, we heard for the entirety of Donald Trump's presidency and even beyond, Russian collusion, Russian collusion, Russian collusion. Here you have something that, as you note, is plain as day. It's not even hidden in plain sight. It's just in plain sight. And you have to crane your neck in ways that the human body is not meant to twist to not look at it. But that's what's happening. Yeah,
totally. The lack of curiosity of journalists to these great stories is it's very understandable, but it's madness. It's complete madness on a whole slew of levels. These are brilliant, brilliant journalistic stories, and the detail. And
they tell themselves. They tell themselves. I mean, you can't. There's no color. You don't have to add color.
The script for this movie is writing itself, and and if Hollywood had any decency, they would be competing to make this movie at this stage. It writes itself, but they're not, because big Hollywood, big tech, and big media, their job is to cover up for the Democrats, cover up for the Democratic Party, and cover up for liberalism. And they're entitled to do that, I suppose, but let's not call themselves journalists.
Yeah.
Let's call themselves stenographers or or court eunuchs or whatever it is they are, but they're not journalists.
And you've got a crowdfunding campaign set up at mysonhunter.com. And I wanted to ask you about the Hollywood connection, because you're raising $2.5 million for this. You've already gotten a huge amounts of money, and I know you're going to continue to have momentum there. This is huge by the standards of crowdfunding for a feature film, but this would be pennies to a lot of these Hollywood film studios.
That's right.
Totally. This is the catering budget on big movies. I mean that's often a joke. True. It's true. Actually true. But this is where we are. We're forced to make do. We're going to film it in Serbia, which is cheap, and will double as Ukraine. It's even got a Chinatown where we can pretend it's China.
Does Serbia double as Delaware too?
We might shoot Delaware in Delaware.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or Oklahoma, or somewhere over on somewhere on this side of the
ocean. One great thing about Serbia is it has, apparently, I'm told, has lots of very beautiful women and strip clubs, which no movie about Hunter Biden would be complete without beautiful women and strip clubs.
But no, I'm glad you mentioned about the crowdfunding campaign. We've raised, so we're raising, as Phelim says, we're raising $2.5 million. It's the biggest campaign we've ever done. We raised $2.3 million in the past for the Gosnell movie. But, we had our first day yesterday, right?
Yeah.
And on our first day, we were up to a little over $250,000 already. So about 10%. Of the budget already, which is a great start. But we would love anyone who's listening to this show to, give what you can. It's important. This is an important story, and as Phelim says, we shouldn't need to be making this movie if journalists did their job.
We're now heading towards over 300,000. So money is coming in, but it's a bit of it's a stretch between there and 2.5.
But it's great. But people are really great.
We got 60 days, so please, people,
give what you can.
Let's make sure the cover-up stops.
Yeah, no, this is an important story.
Now, I know that when you had the Gosnell film released, one of the things that was just tremendous about it, and I think I may have said this to you, Phelim, when we spoke last time, is that, yes, there was a political message there, but it was a good movie first, before it was just one of those preachy, hit you over the head with it ones. And I think that that's important for people that haven't seen your work to understand that, yes, you guys have been great advocates for many causes over the years, but you're entertainers first and foremost in this way. Like, you want to make a good movie.
Yeah, no, it's essential. And we were making Gosnell. That was our big command, was this has to look like every other movie. Funny, which is a funny thing to say about a movie. We wanted people to look at it and think, it's one of those procedurals, a courtroom attention, in my chambers now, objection, whatever, C5, whatever, all that. It's important that we make entertainment that is entertainment. And if there's anything we want to say, and it needs to be subservient to the entertainment, to the story, to the narrative. And the great thing about covering these court cases is if you stick to the truth, the truth will set you free and tell a great story.
MySonHunter.com. That's the website where people can chip in. And you can also catch Anne and Phelim on their fantastic podcast, the Anne and Phelim Scoop. Anne McElhinney, Phelim McAleer, thanks so much for coming on, and a happy belated St. Patrick's Day to you both.
Thank you so much.
We're in the green. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.